Hello, my name is Anthony Carver. I'm the UT Extension Director and Extension Agent for UT Extension here in Granger County, Tennessee, home of the world-famous, great-tasting Granger County tomatoes.
Here in Granger County, there's lots of commercial tomato production, but throughout East Tennessee and Middle and West Tennessee, there are also many residents who practice the art and the science of home tomato production. Hello, I'm Natalie Bumgarner. I'm the Residential and Consumer Horticulture Extension Specialist for UT Extension, and I'm here this morning with Anthony to give you a few tips and tricks to enhance the quality of the home tomato production in your garden. One of the most important early decisions for the home gardener is choosing the right site for your garden. You want to make sure that you choose a site that has full sun. You don't want any trees nearby that would shade your crop, especially for tomatoes because they really prefer full sun. You want to make sure that it's a spot where the water drains well. You don't want a low-lying area where water can pool. And you want to make sure that your soil is well prepared when you begin. Whether you use a large tractor or a smaller piece of tillage equipment, it's important to wait until your soil is moderately dry, till it well so that you have a fine, smooth seed bed in which to plant your plants.
It's very easy to take a soil sample. The preferred time for a garden would be in the fall of the year. Even though there might be a lot of sod on the ground where you're going to place your garden, it's okay to take a soil sample then. All you'll need is a small bucket and something to dig with, and if it's sod, you may have to have a small shovel or something of that nature to actually get down into the dirt. All you'll really need is a sample that is about 2 fingers width and about 6 inches deep from top to bottom. And you'll need about 8 to 12 of those samples throughout that area where you're thinking about placing your garden. Once you get your test results back from the soil test, reading those and going by those is very critical. The first thing you need to look at is what the pH is of your soil. We know that tomatoes enjoy to be around 6.5 to 6.8 in their pH. The reason that is it helps reduce the chances of some of the diseases from the soil actually attacking your plants. Depending on what your soil test calls for, it's always good to put your fertilizer down beforehand and incorporate that in so it's ready and available for your plant to take up whenever you place your plants in the ground. It's always good to have a complete fertilizer, something that has all 3 components, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These are the tools you will need to support your tomatoes. It's always good to have a tomato stake or a stick, and the longer the better. Because of the different varieties you may select, an indeterminate variety will not top themselves and continually grow throughout the top of the stick. We'll also need a post hole driver or some way to drive the stake into the ground. After that, you'll need some twine or some string to actually support your tomato plant to the stake.
When it comes to planting and managing your garden, there are many tools that will really come in handy. You can have tools for planting your plants, from small trowels to larger shovels, depending upon the size of your crop. You're also going to need several tools for cultivation. When it comes to removing the weeds and managing your crop, there are several shapes and sizes of hose that can come in handy for cultivating close to the plants. There are also a range of mechanical tillage equipment that you can use to till between the rows, such as this small tiller. A very important aspect of home tomato production is the selection of your plants. It's important to be picky in the beginning. This is not the time to shop for bargains. When you select tomato plants, you want to choose plants that are stocky, that aren't too elongated or leggy. You want to make sure that they have a nice dark green color and that there's no signs of insect or disease on any of the leaves. We want plants that haven't been through a lot of stress and that are ready to get in the ground and start growing for us.
One of the products we can use for weed control is a pre-emergent herbicide. We're going to be using a corn gluten meal product today. Basically, you will just sprinkle that onto the soil and we will rake that or hold that in. And what that does is that prevents any of the weed seeds from germinating and actually coming up. This works really good for our tomatoes whenever we're transplanting in because they're not coming up from seed.
Another option that home gardeners have to reduce weed problems in their garden is the use of a mulch. This is a plastic mulch that I have that's specifically made for home gardeners. Large commercial producers would apply mulch with a tractor, but we can have a small plastic mulch bed in our own home garden. It does several things for our crop. It can increase the temperature of the soil early in the season. It can reduce waterlogging if we have a very rainy summer like we sometimes do here in Tennessee. And it can protect our crops from weeds. There are also many organic mulches that home gardeners can use for their tomato production. Plastic mulches are generally installed before planting, but many of the organic mulches are installed after planting. These generally begin with a layer of newspaper to keep down weed growth, and then hay or straw can be layered on top of the newspaper. A very important thing for homeowners to understand about plastic mulch is that it does a great job of warming up our soil temperatures and reducing the weeds, but it doesn't allow rain to go through. So if we're going to be planting in a solid plastic like what we have here, we'll need to put a drip irrigation line underneath of it so that we can water our plants. Drip irrigation can be helpful, but it's not necessary if we're planting in bare soil or using an organic mulch because rain can penetrate through that organic mulch. To get our young plants started off well, as soon as we get them planted, we're going to give them a little bit of what we call a starter fertilizer. We're going to be using a soluble fertilizer like a Miracle-Gro or some other similar product, and we're just going to mix it with the water. It'll dissolve completely, and this will give our young plants a jump start right after transplant.
Well, let's get our hands dirty and actually plant some tomato plants. It's always important to understand how far apart you actually need to plant your plants, and the spacing between rows and actually between the plants inside the row. It really all determines about with the varieties that you are selecting to plant. If you're planting a determinate variety, which means that they top themselves, you won't need as much space between the plants. Or if you have an indeterminate variety, then you can have to place those at a wider width apart from each other.
So today we have young determinate plants, and we're going to plant these 18 inches apart in our row. All right, Anthony's going to cut a small hole so that we can get our plants about 18 inches apart for these determinate plants and gently remove some of this dry soil. You can see how dry that soil is underneath the mulch. It's a good reason why we need to make sure that if we're using plastic, we get some drip irrigation under there. It's going to gently create a nice hole for our young tomato plant. You can see we have lots of nice white roots here, so I'm gently handling the tomato plant. We're going to put just a little bit of starter fertilizer in this hole before we start so that we make sure that there's a lot of moisture in there for these young roots to take hold when we place them in the soil. So we're going to gently put the plant with the media right there in that hole and just cover a thin layer of soil over the top of the greenhouse media. We don't need to bury them too deeply. These plants are really just about the right size. But that way the air doesn't really quickly dry out that greenhouse media. We've got some soil there to protect it. Gently tamp it down to make sure that we don't have any loose air pockets. Our plants are in the ground and we are ready for home tomato production.